Let's explore cell organelles and molecules from week 1. Specifically, I'll be talking about the cell membrane. The plasma membrane is made up of phospholipids, cholesterol, and membrane proteins. Phospholipids cause the bilayer to be selectively permeable because of the hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions. Now, if we look at one phospholipid in particular, we see that it's made up of one hydrophilic head and two hydrophobic tails. The hydrophilic head is attracted to water because it is polar or charged. Hydrophobic tail are molecules that are nonpolar or not charged, and hydrophobic means fear of water, hence the word phobic. When we talk about the cell membrane or the plasma membrane, this is a nice cartoon representation of it. In this image, I have circled one of the phosphate heads, which has a negative charge, meaning that it is attracted to water, and two fatty acid chains coming off of it. Because the heads like to interact with water, they are on the outside of the bilayer. We have water inside and outside of our cells. The fatty acid chains that are afraid of water aggregate, and this creates the phospholipid bilayer. This structure helps with the permeability or ability for molecules to pass through the membrane. If something is permeable, that means that it can pass through. And the opposite would be, if it is not permeable, that means that it cannot pass through. The purple structures in this image represent proteins that are embedded in the membrane. They help facilitate movement of the molecules that cannot pass through the membrane. These proteins are an important part to the function of things like our nervous system. This summary slide goes through the different options of diffusion across the membrane. On the far left, we can see the hydrophobic molecules are the extreme. Things like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and steroids can easily get through. Now, if you have small and uncharged, you can get through but slowly, which is represented by the smaller arrow. If you are large and polar, for example, glucose and sucrose, you are denied access across the membrane. And lastly, ions. An ion cannot pass through without the help of a protein. Size, polarity, and charge all play a role in what molecules can easily diffuse across the membrane. We have two different types of transport, active transport and passive transport. I have made this flowchart to represent the different parts of passive and active transport. The process of diffusion is the movement of molecules from a high to low concentration. This is natural in our bodies. Passive transport is diffusion. For active transport, we see a low to high concentration gradient. Now, when talking about passive transport, there are a few different options. The first one is simple diffusion. Simple diffusion, which we can see on the left-hand side, is the ability of a molecule to move right through the membrane from high to low. Only molecules that are neutral can simply diffuse. However, if molecules are not neutral, you can use facilitated diffusion. This is the process of diffusion with the help of a protein. The purple structures that I talked about earlier are channel proteins specific to what molecules you have. You can have leak or gated channels. A leak channel is open all the time, and a gated channel is only open at certain time for certain molecules. Lastly, we have a carrier-mediated protein, which moves solutes down the concentration gradient, but must bind to a carrier protein. Now we can see on the right-hand side that facilitated diffusion uses the help of a protein to get molecules from a high to low concentration. Lastly, we have active transport, which uses pumps. Active transport also requires energy and moves molecules from a low to high concentration, which is the opposite from passive transport, which requires no energy and moves molecules from a high to low concentration. Now, this type of carrier-mediated diffusion uses pumps and has molecules bind to a protein, change shape, and moves molecules up the gradient. You can see this represented in this image well. Active transport needs energy, or that ATP, to get molecules from a low to high concentration. I hope I was able to explain the cell membrane, a complex structure that delineates the intracellular from extracellular space, functions in cell-to-cell communication, and regulations of transport and permeability.